Okay, just been keeping my eye on the comments there. Right, okay, I think that segues quite nicely into Penny. We'll have time at the end again for more questions and chat. So Penny, do you want to introduce yourself and your project?
I will, yes. Okay.
Our
So
project,
I've
I should
got
say.
some slides, which I'll show you as well to help you on the journey. But I mean, it's just been fascinating listening to Wendy and Moira. I've made loads of notes, excuse me, just because there are so many points that actually I wanted to talk to you about, but obviously we can't right now. But, you know, it's been very informative for me. Thank you. And just made me think about loads of things as well. So, okay. So thank you both anyway, that's been great. And hopefully this will follow on quite neatly. So I'm Penny Redwood, as you can see. And I'm, as I said earlier, I'm a social worker by background, but when I was 60, I decided I had done my time and I left social work and I'm just concentrating on other things. So I'm an associate with Life Story Network. And in 2016, the Department of Health gave Life Stories Network some funding to look into, it was part of their trying to improve post-diagnostic care for people with dementia program. And so they gave us some money to look at what home means to people's sense of identity, where it fits in with people's sense of identity when they've got dementia. And that's sort of over the last few years, that's become something that I'm really interested in and just want to pursue, because I just feel it's just so important, as we've heard from both Wendy and Moira. You know, they've just confirmed for us how important home is to us, the various aspects of home. So what we did was we set out really to gain greater insight into what home means to people who are living with dementia, and then to really try and raise awareness amongst professionals, amongst the general population about those issues, really, so that people can think about how difficult transitions, how difficult moving can be, for instance, for people with dementia, and how important home is, and if people can remain in their homes for as long as possible. You know, some of the ways that both Wendy and Moira have been talking about how that familiarity means so much to actually people being able to live independently, to live the lives that they want to live. And then we wanted to produce some products as a consequence of that. So what we did was, over in Merseyside, we interviewed quite a lot of people who were living with dementia, some of them who were living in the community, some people who are in sheltered housing, extra care housing. We talked to the surf group. I didn't, but I think Ruth did, that Moira is a part of. And then we also we brought together a bunch of professionals as well, just really to explore what people, you know, what people were feeling about home, so that we could develop some ideas of themes that were coming through. It was so much fun a lot of the time. People really engaged with what we were doing. People really engaged with the ideas. People obviously enjoyed, the people that we met anyway, enjoyed talking about their homes, stories about their homes. And it was a really, really nice project to do. So next slide, please. Okay, so these are the themes from, it was called, sorry, I forgot to say this, it was called Beyond the Front Door in those days. That was the first part of the project, was called Beyond the Front Door. The second part of the project that I'm going to come on to is called My Home Matters. So these are the themes that came out, really, that, you know, people repeatedly came up with about why home was important to them. So I'm just going to run through these quickly, just to sort of, you know, get you thinking about the issues that people that were important to people. A big thing was about connections. So connections with family. So for instance, you know, home is often, you know, a place where you've brought up your family. So there's all those memories about, you know, bringing up the kids or whatever, or, you know, you haven't necessarily lived in the house all your life, for instance, but there's a range, you know, things have happened in the house, in the home, that are really important to you. So friends, you've got friends around you. If you're living in the same area, for instance, you know, you can invite friends. It's a place where you can bring your friends in. You can invite them in for a cuppa or whatever. Having neighbours, the importance of neighbours, particularly if they're friendly neighbours, of course. The locality, so knowing the area that you're in and how important that is, just because, you know, the familiarity means that you can, you know, where you can go down to buy your vegetables, you know where the post office is, for instance, without having to think about it too hard. Okay, I accept that that can become more difficult, but the familiarity gives you much better chance of being able to keep up those skills, that independence. The place, just knowing the place, knowing things about the place. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And then just those memories, if you think about, for in your situation, you know, the memories that are connected with your home, even if, you know, you only moved there recently, for instance, you know, there's a real attachment. There are reasons why you're living in that place, which are no doubt of significance to you. People also talked about how they'd done their homes up. And if you think about it, each and every one of us do up our homes, don't we? We decorate, we have furniture that we like. You know, we do it within our means, but we do it in a way that enables us to live comfortably, enables us to live, as Moira and Wendy have both been talking about, you know, in enabling us to live in the ways that we choose to, that we want to, you know, that we are comfortable with. So, you know, there's a lot invested in that home, in the shell of the home, but within the home too, and all those belongings, of course, that's a part of all of that. I've mentioned locality already. So, you know, people talked about how, you know, just knowing where you can go and get things, for instance, is important. You know, that groups you may be involved in, for instance, community stuff, all of those things that are familiar to you and that make up your life, a part of your life, and also feed into that sense of who you are, because that's one of the key things about this project. It's about how important our sense of identity, our sense of ourself is to us all, and how actually it's one of the things that when we're living with dementia increasingly can be eroded, as I'm sure, you know, we're all aware of. And the importance of knowing who we are, that sense of ourselves, is just of crucial importance to us living good lives, isn't it? Cultural roots. So yeah, so one of the things, so Ruth, I think she one of the interviews that she conducted was with a group, I think, of Somali people, but anyway, but the point is really that, you know, home can be in more than one place, can't it? So, you know, you were born in Somalia, but actually you migrated to the UK. So Somalia could still be home, but so is Liverpool, for instance. And so, you know, that sense of place, of culture, is important to each and every one of us, isn't it? You know, I think about how, I mean, I live in Yorkshire now, and I was brought up in Chester, so I see Chester as my home, and so I've got an attachment to the place, even though I haven't been back there for years. So and then with the cultural roots, which are important to our sense of who we are, there's, of course, then we've all got different expectations of how we live and how we live in our homes, how we have our homes set up as well. And so, for instance, you know, those things matter enormously, obviously, to the quality of our lives when we're there, but also say we have to move. It's that recognition, if there are people, if there are professionals, for instance, who are going to be supporting you to make a move, it's important to know what those expectations, what those needs are, and they could be psychological, emotional, you know, needs, as well as practical needs. For instance, you know, thinking about somebody, for instance, who is very religious, and there may be a whole lot of paraphernalia, or maybe that's sounds a bit disingenuous, but, you know, objects, there are things that are important to you about, you know, when you move, for instance. People talked about the importance of personal space, and how you need somewhere where you can be private, where you can withdraw to your, you know, into yourself if that's what you want to do. And so that can be your home, or it could be a place in your home. You know, people talked about different places within their home that actually they felt that was their space, somewhere where they could be comfortable, where they could withdraw to when they wanted to, and how important having that space is. I think, you know, that comfort, I think that's all, you know, Wendy and Moira have talked about that very eloquently, really, the importance of, you know, home being comfortable. I mean, and so, of course, that's what home should be. But it's also true that home isn't always comfortable for people. It depends what's happened in their homes. If you've had some very, say, abusive relationships, for instance, then it's not necessarily going to be a comfortable place. And the other issue I'd say there is that, of course, you know, home could have been comfortable, but then it's become less comfortable now, just because you can't live in that space as easily as you used to be able to do. So a point that my daughter makes to me about this home, I mean, this home, if we have mobility problems, my house, it's on 4 floors, it's a complete disaster, but it's full of trip hazards, is what she points out to me, which I refuse to do anything about because obviously I haven't tripped over yet. Hope I don't, but but I can see how this house, which is really comfortable for us at the moment, and I'd love to die in this house, won't necessarily be comfortable for us for the rest of our lives. And it's also full of lots of attachments as well. And I think we're much more aware nowadays about how important attachments are to us. So that's attachments, excuse me, to objects, to things, to people, to places. And so, you know, our homes are full of things that we may be emotionally attached to. And one of the things, thinking forwards to the workbook that I'm going to take you through in a moment, is that does anybody, you know, so for instance, my daughter, if I had to move from here, if I had to downsize, she'd have a pretty good idea of some of the things that are significant to me, but not everything. There are some things, there's no way Bryony would pick up that object and think, oh, that's really important to mum. She's probably never even noticed it in her life, but that's got huge significance for me, simply because I can't even remember where I found it from. I bought it, but it was when in my traveling days, you know, that's something that I loved and I bought, and I hitchhiked all the way back from Asia carrying this blooming gourd. Feeling safe and secure, I think that goes without saying, that people talked about how important having a place, having a home that feels safe and secure could be. And going back to what I was saying about changes that can occur, for instance, is you could feel that you could have felt very safe in your home and very comfortable. And then like the neighborhood changes, there are changes outside, external to your home, for instance, that can actually have an impact on how safe you feel in the home, for instance. So that safety and security is important, but may lead you to wanting to make a transition, for instance. So all of those, I'm going to come on to the final one in a sec, but all of those themes were things that people talked to us about, and they were repeated over and over again. So it became obvious that these were, you know, really important factors in enabling people to think about what home means to them. Finally, the clarity about available options, and this has been mentioned already, is how people were very clear, and nearly everybody, I think, must have said this, not knowing what your options were and not knowing where to go for advice either. So I know we've heard about how, you know, there've been vagaries in different authorities, different people, professionals responding in different ways, but it's also, you know, the fact that people just didn't know where they should even go for advice. They didn't know what their housing options were. So I feel I've spent a lot of time on that, sorry. Should we have the next slide? So, those were the outcomes of the Beyond the Front Door, which the report you can download from here. And so I'm now going to just quickly try and take you through the next bit of the project, which is My Home Matters, which is the next slide, please. Oh, no, it isn't. Oops. Okay, so this is just a quote that I really like. Claire Cooper Marcus. She's written a very interesting book, actually, which is here. House as a Mirror of Self. And so what she's looking at is how self-image is reflected in our homes, really. That's helpful. So next slide. And actually this slide is just some of the quotes that we thought you might be interested in that came out of our interviews. And I guess "Home is where Dave is" is a quote from Moira.
Actually, it was another carer, but never mind. I'm sure it applies to Moira as well.
Oh, sorry.
It was Eileen Gilbert.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Right,
Yes.
yeah.
Sorry, Moira.
That's all right, but it's fair enough.
Okay, let's move on to the workbook. Please. Thank you. Okay, so the next bit of the project, which was lottery funded, was that what we did was we took the themes from the research that we've done over in Merseyside, and we wanted to actually put them into a way that people could actually use them, because one of the things that we're really looking for is trying to help people, to support people, to think about transitions, because one of the things that has become really clear to me in the work that I've been doing on this is how little people plan ahead, and how, I mean, I suppose I sort of knew that already, but there's no doubt that, and what's interesting is I tried to run a course locally at my adult ed centre for helping people to plan in later life. 3 people signed up for it, so it never ran. And, you know, I've heard from other people, of someone else, a friend who tried to do the same, that she had the same lack of take up, really. So what we're trying to do is help people to plan, to think ahead, to actually, so that if they have to make a move, if they have to transition, whether it just be to another house, another home that's they're downsizing, or into shelters, housing, extra care, or even a care home, so that it's trying to give people an opportunity to think about those things that are really important to them, so that they can actually then move in the best way possible for them. So what we've done is we've devised a workbook called My Home Matters. It's online. Well, to be perfectly honest, following some workshops that we ran over the summer on Zoom, we did some consultation stuff, and that was really helpful. And we've still got to make some changes, so it's actually not online at the moment, but it will be. But we produced this workbook, which enables people to think about various elements of what home means to them, so they've got an opportunity and a way of recording it. So it's flexible. It will be back up online on the website, so people can download it, and it's expandable. So, you know, you can do it. People can do it in whatever way they want to. So there are 10 topics that you can explore. And so the first one is what makes a place home for me, which you can see. And on the screen, so this is just some stuff that I've put together. So you've got on the what makes a place home for me. So I put some photos in and typed some stuff. On another page, I wrote things, you know, it's just however suits people. you can do it in whatever way. So what makes a place home for me? Then you get an opportunity to think about where home is for you. If you think back to what I was saying about how home can be more than one place for people. Important places, so places of significance in your life, for instance. Things that you're attached to. So just going back to, you know, those emotional attachments, for instance, you know, thinking about things in your home that you're attached to. but it can be places as well and stuff, but that's mostly about thinking about, if you were to move, what are those important things that you would want to have with you? People who are important to you. Then there's an opportunity to think about how you feel about having to move from your home, because often, and particularly if you're living with dementia or you're living in later life, you may be faced with an ultimatum, or just people saying, don't you think it's time you moved on? Don't you think you should go and live in a care home, for instance? So it may not be your first choice. It may not be your choice at all. So for instance, in my mum's experience, to cut a very long story short, mum moved into a care home. My dad had died some years before, and it just became completely untenable. She lived in Herefordshire, I lived in Yorkshire, and my brother and sister live abroad. So, excuse me, to cut a long story short, she moved up to a care home in Otley, where I live, which in many ways worked out, but she didn't want to do it at all. She did it, I think, under sufferance, really, although I think she appreciated why it was happening, but she didn't want to do it at all. So, and actually what was interesting is, in relation to this workbook, I mean, we hadn't done that, we hadn't done that work back then, but so we went through a whole process, myself and my nieces and daughter, of talking with mum about what she was going to take, because she was moving into a care home, and she was moving into what was considered to be a big room, a large room, so she paid more for. Take it from me, it wasn't a big room. But you know, it was a painful conversation, and I look back to actually years gone by when mum had been trying to work on these things about what was important to us and who would inherit what, the things and stuff, which is slightly different, but I always closed her down because I couldn't bear the conversation. And it's one of those things I look back to and think about, how Penny, actually, that was mum really trying to sort things out and do some future planning, and you stopped her. Anyway, sorry, I've sort of gone off on there. So that's all about how I feel about moving from my current home, choosing where to live. So instead, because there's a lot of really useful resources online from organisations like Age UK, like Independent Age, the Alzheimer's Society, and many others, there's lots of information about that actually can help you make some choices about how you move, if you have to move, if you could adapt your house, for instance, or where you might consider moving to. So what we've done is, instead of just replicating all that really useful information, which is actually out there already, we've got pages of links to help people find, look at what their options could well be. Final bit that people would fill in is who I'm happy to share this with, and that's simply just because it's like, if, say, somebody had undertaken this workbook, just think about who could look at that. So thinking about, for instance, if you've got a social worker helping you, or an OT, for instance, are you happy for them to look at it? Because if they're supporting you to make a move, actually, it probably would be quite useful. Or families, other people in your family who you're happy to read it, people who aren't. So those are the chapters, you could say, that in the workbook for people to have enough to work through at their own convenience, really. And just to say that in the structure of it is that there's an introduction. So what makes a place home for me? There's a bit of an introduction, and then there's some questions you can ask yourself. There's some prompts, and then there's an activity as well, or activities. They're just suggested activities just to help people get going, because if you've not really been thinking about these things, just posing the question can't always, doesn't always work very well, does it? So that's the structure. I sort of feel I should probably finish now. I should just say that we also did some training for some staff in Leeds. I'm based near Leeds. And we did some training with staff because originally, the original bid was what we hoped to do was to run courses for people. And I hope that we still will be able to do this one day, get some more funding to do this. So we trained up some staff who could support people living with dementia and their family carers. And we've got a structure for that to actually have a few weeks of sessions, which I think would have been a lot of fun going by what happened in Merseyside. But of course, COVID put an end to that. So the workbook will be coming online and we will be spreading the word about it in the hope that people will use it. And I think I should stop there. Because I've talked.
Great, thanks, Penny. Is that your last slide?
I think it was. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Good. Well, quite a bit in the chat room. Obviously, people see the value of the workbook, which is great. And it's a way of getting people to think about things and to talk about things, which as you've said, we tend to shy away from. So that's really good. Okay. Right. Okay. Do you want to add anything, Moira, having listened to Penny and what she's fed back?
Well, I think the main thing, it's just the most recent thought I've had over the last quarter of an hour, however long it's been, is I must get down and do the workbook. I think that's the thing, because my nieces are going to have the job of dealing with all of this, and I thought, I don't think I've given them enough direction.
Yes, I think it's really interesting. Like Penny, I'm fascinated by this. And for me, lockdown has made me think about lots of things to do with home. And the fact that, during lockdown, a couple of my friends have found it really hard because they're on their own. But you're too far away to be able to do anything, and you can Zoom and you can speak on the phone, but to actually be able to be near them and to give them a hug and have a coffee with them, we haven't been able to do that. So thinking about proximity where you live and proximity to people who are important to you has been part of my thinking as well. And I know that it's helped some people decide on whether they want to move, and if so, where to move to. About 3 or 4 of my friends have actually made that decision, not as a consequence of, but they've been helped by the fact they've spent so much time at home. It's crystallized for them what's important, and they've moved, they've gone to where they want to be. So that's been really helpful for them. Okay. Anything else in the chat room, Francis, that I need to pick up?
So lots of comments about planning and how difficult it is to get people to plan, and that the workbook is obviously a really good starting point. I think that you've done some other work around planning that has actually shown how important it can be, both in end of life, but actually the earlier you start planning, and it's true for all of us, the earlier you future-proof your home to the things that will be inevitable in older age, the better it is, the more in control you'll feel, and the more you'll like your own home, and the more happy you are. Now that is true for all of us whose home works for us. The figures are astonishing. People love their own home. 97% of people who own their own home are they're happy or very happy with their own home and don't want to move. But it is really wise to start those conversations early about how will it work for me when I'm 20 years older than I am today. And none of us have those thoughts very much, partly because we have children, partly because until we have a crisis, we don't know. So it is really interesting that people are hopping onto that. If we could, for me, this is a public health issue as much as anything. If we can get people to plan better about how they want to live, then they'd be happier and be in more control. Fascinating conversation, really fascinating conversation.
Okay, Wendy, do you want to add anything? Have listened?
Yeah, I just think it's important when you're fit and healthy in a home that you love to just ask yourself, do I want to be here in 20 years' time? And to just have those thoughts, sow those seeds in your own head, so that, because none of us know what's around the corner. You know, he can come tomorrow, or he can come in 20 years. But it's just being prepared to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
I think something else as well that is to take into the mix, really, of the things that make it very important, that particularly if you're thinking of staying put, are there any things that could change other than, you know, your ability to look after yourself and so on? Because something which has happened to us is we had the most wonderful neighbours, a lot younger than us, and they were frequently uppermost in our mind about when we thought about the future, because we would hate not to live next door to them, and they were such a support to us. And you cannot believe it, but they got divorced and moved. And that's something that I'm sure they at that time, you know, didn't think it was going to happen, and we certainly didn't. And it's only just happened. In actual fact, the husband has only moved in the last 2 months, but had we known that prior to getting the downstairs shower, we might have changed our mind. Although I'm very averse to moving house because it's such a huge job. But I would hate to have to do it with responsibility.
So we've done some work on people planning to move, and it's really interesting because many people say in their mid-50s that the house would be too big for them and that they're planning either to move or to adapt it. Only 9% of people convert those thoughts into action, and there's lots of push and pull factors that go into that, and we've done some work on that. But community, the neighbours that you have, is one of the major ones, and so there are two instances where people do move. One is very just before or just after retirement, to move to people of like mind, or to move closer to the family, or to move to a place where they feel more comfortable. The other moment is after 75, when they're forced to by a crisis, and when very often it's not a great thing to do, because that forced move is not very often successful. Too many people making choices for about your future home that are not necessarily your choice. And so we would like that conversation to start earlier, really, bearing in mind that 28% of the current housing stock in England cannot be adapted. So even if you wanted a downstairs bathroom in a quarter of the houses in England, you couldn't actually fit one in.
Yeah.
Wendy?
Yeah, I when I moved to my village, I was forced to move in a way because of my age. I had a mortgage and everything, so I had to move from what I thought was my forever home to a cheaper home, because no one would have given me a mortgage having dementia. So, but what me and my girls didn't realize was that I wasn't capable of choosing the right and appropriate house. I chose it because of the huge bay window that I have overlooking a paddock. And I didn't need 3 bedrooms. I didn't need a house. I didn't need steps up to my garden. I didn't need 2 big gardens. But at the time, we didn't realize that I wasn't choosing correctly, because I'd moved hundreds of times and loved it. So it's also being aware of those little things as well when you choose to move. The type of house you need advice, and you need people to sow seeds.
I think you're being really hard on yourself, Wendy. I think that most of the important decisions we make in life, we stumble into with too little information. we don't actually sufficiently think about them at all, and they sort of happen to us. And it's only after the event that we think that actually that might have been the wisest thing to do. And I think that's just life, regardless. But I might be wrong. I might just be foolish.
I don't think you are.
Have I just seen a cat climb up the wall there?
You have
Francis?
just seen a cat climb up
What
the wall.
I have,
I'm
not
so
seeing
sorry.
things.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, that's been really interesting discussion. Thank you so much to Wendy, Moira and Penny. Really helpful. And from the chats, it's obvious that people have found that useful as well. So we will make this available, as Francis said, certainly on the Foundation's website. So we'll be able to send a link to everybody, won't we?
Well, certainly. So for everybody registered on today, we'll make sure there's a link so you can find the content. As I said earlier on in the right at the beginning, if you're interested in engaging further with this conversation, I'm really pleased with the very thought-provoking contributions by some of the OTs. Actually, we'd love to hear from you and see whether we can actually do some work together. It's been great. So thank you all for coming. We're finishing a little early. That's always good. So thank you, Ruth, for making it possible.
Pleasure.
So thank you, Wendy, for having a completely glitch-free afternoon. Moira, thank you very much for doing your presentation and intervening. I think it's really nice when people just feel free to actually sort of interrupt other presentations and actually contribute, because it gives the feeling of a whole thing to the afternoon. And thank you, Penny, for sharing your insights.
Great, thank you.